into stage number 3. Now, stage number 3 is a very important stage because it's going to give us one of our most important items that we can get, the hover jet, or the hover boost. Once obtaining it, then we're going to have to not only worry about our health meter, we're also going to have to worry about our hover meter to make sure that we have hover points when we're going to need to hover over certain areas. And until later on, where we're going to get different other abilities that allow us to do some other stuff, including walking on the actual walls, the hover boost is definitely going to be pretty useful. One of the most annoying things about it, though, is that the hover thing uses a lot of points that they diminish rather quickly, and you don't get full of it very often. From here on out, though, certain enemies will start dropping the hover thing instead of dropping power, but they seemingly don't drop the hover every time you need it. Only when you're completely full or don't need the hover, that's when, of course, they're going to decide to drop it. And we're going to need a lot of hover, because to get to stage number 4, we have to hover up a very long wall. And while some enemies will drop the hover, there's a lot of enemies who will not drop it at all, or seemingly if they do, the drop ratio is very, very low. When those enemies do appear that allow you to get the hover ability, you may want to stand there a little bit and build up your hover meter. You may want to go left and right for them to respawn, or you may want to exit and re-enter certain rooms and try to build it back up. Thankfully though, the hover isn't needed every couple of seconds. There's long gaps usually in between the times when the hover is absolutely necessary, and then when you get to later on in the game, the hover becomes really not even that useful because you start gaining other abilities that help you out and other abilities that you need in order to get up certain walls or get through certain passages in the game. And thankfully, those other abilities that you're going to gain later on in the game don't require any sort of power meter in order to fuel them. So hover and power or health are the only things you really need to worry about. One annoying thing also is you can't build up your hover meter until you actually get the hover ability. I guess it makes sense, but since some enemies start dropping it early, it would be nice to at least have a full thing. Most of the game, though, is what I've been doing so far, and that's just going through these very long map areas, these overworld or the main map areas, fighting through random hordes of enemies, and slowly progressing through many different paths to find the one actual room that has a boss battle. And then once you leave that boss battle, you either continue on a little bit, or you end up having to backtrack through every single stage you've already been to in order to get to another stage to find another boss. Now, really for the most part at the beginning, we haven't seen a whole lot of backtracking. But as soon as this level is complete, that's when it really starts to kick in. To get to stage 4 from stage 3 is when we have to go all the way back through the stage 1. And at the very beginning of the game, I mentioned the big wall that we're going to have to hover up. That's actually the very first screen of the game. When you first spawn in the game, that wall to the left there, that's the wall that we're going to have to travel up in order to get to the next stage. Now thankfully, we actually are getting to the end of stage number 3. We're nearing the actual boss chambers, or whatever you like to call it. Just a few more little rows of maze to navigate through before we get there. At the end of this room, we'll enter a very small chamber where the door will be located to that top-down view where we'll have to do battle with another boss. The boss of stage number 3 is probably one of the most challenging of the earlier bosses. At least for the hardest boss of the first half of the game or so. As I exit the tank and go inside the room. Now, just like the previous couple ones, this one isn't too hard to navigate. It's actually just a really long walkway and then a couple of smaller rooms before we end up making it to the boss chamber. Once again, the grenade ends up being pretty much more useful than my gun. Of course, if you upgrade the gun it becomes very useful. But since you lose, like I said, the gun ability every single time you get hit, you lose one of it, it doesn't necessarily become a necessity to keep along. Now, in this room, if you want to take the time, you can go ahead and destroy all the blocks in the room, and you may get lucky to find a lot of health or a lot of the weapon upgrades. Usually you'll at least get one, like I just uncovered there. The next room is our boss battle. Now, this boss is a series of little, squares that move around, and they appear and they kind of freeze in place. But they're a real nuisance. You have to destroy them pretty quickly. Memorizing the path in which they spawn is probably the easiest way to destroy them all. You're going to get basically one square for every square foot of the room, or whatever you want to decide it would be. Basically, a square is going to fit in every little tiny square that can possibly be in this room. After, though, they move a little bit, they do freeze, and then another one will spawn, and then that other one will come back to life for a second. If you memorize the path of them, they always come in the same exact path every time you do the battle. If you memorize the path of them, though, they can be relatively easy to take out with the grenades. And for defeating him, like I've been hyping up for pretty much the last 10 minutes or so, you do get the hover ability, which will greatly help us in a few areas. Now once we leave this area, it's a little bit of a pain because I have to get the hover meter up a little bit in order to get through a couple areas. I'm going to try to get as much of it as I can between traveling from where I am currently to trying to get to that beginning part of the game. And as you can see right there, I just used it for just a split second, and I lost the 1 meter of it I already had. So you can see it drains rather quickly and can be an annoyance to get some more of it. Most of the enemies I've been destroying so far haven't allowed me to get any. Now as we're going to travel, there's going to be a few enemies, like I said before, that I know which ones they are, that I'll go ahead and defeat a lot of them, or make sure I focus more on them in order to try to get as much hover as I can. And of course, since my health is a little bit low, I'm going to try to get my health back as well. The game is rather difficult, like I've mentioned before, but thankfully most enemies do drop health, so I can regain my health a little bit. Now these enemies right here, these little turrets that are upside down, they are great to obtaining your hover meter, especially at this area where we are right now. I was able to get one from them, but they usually drop every so often. There's a second one. Those are some of the best enemies to go ahead and destroy multiples of. Build up that meter a little bit. I needed at least one in order to make this jump right here, to get up here and destroy this wall, in order to travel a little bit farther up into the room backwards where we have to go, because like I said before, we now have to do a lot of backtracking in order to get back to the beginning of the game. Along the path between here and the beginning, I have to gain at least 4 or 5 hover in order to make it up that wall at the very beginning. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and destroy a few of these turrets to try to obtain some hover. Now this one, unfortunately, is going to be a pain. I'm not going to even be able to obtain it, so I'll just go ahead and leave the room and start my way slowly back to the beginning. Now as I travel backwards, I might as well talk about something else a little bit, because you've already seen all the areas I'm going to go through. I do find it interesting that you may have noticed a little bit, if you don't know the history of Blaster Master in the series as a whole, you may have noticed that Jason, especially on the top-down view when we're facing the bosses, him in his suit looks a little bit like Bomberman. And I guess the makers of Bomberman at Hudson, as well as Sunsoft, thought so as well, because Hudson made a Game Boy game called Bomberman King, where you play as kind of a smaller, like, top-down view of Bomberman, who looks very similar to Jason in the suit, going ahead through different worlds and such, very similar to those top-down levels in this game. Well, Hudson and Sunsoft kind of combined, bringing it to the United States and to the English market, by creating the game, calling it, instead of Bomberman King like it's known in Japan, they named it Blaster Master Boy, or Blaster Master Jr. Junior was what it was known as in its European release, while Boy was what it was known as in the North American release of the game. Now we've returned to stage number 1. I'm going to have to travel back from where we entered stage 2 and make it back through some of the areas we once again have already seen. However, I still need to build up some of my hover, so I'm defeating as many enemies as I can between here and there, just so I don't have to spend time grinding on certain enemies. Now, I said I only need about 4 or 5 hover in order to make it up the wall, so that's really my goal while traveling back to this area. As we now travel out of the giant pit area, we can see back to our main surface world with our trees and such on top, and now we are actually in one small little upwards cave area again, where I can actually see some more of those turret guys, so go ahead and take them out. Hopefully I'll get at least 1 or 2 more hovers before getting to the end here. Go ahead and blow this one up real quick. And there we go, I got health and hover on there, but, oh well, I didn't get the health. Okay, now we're on the very first screen of the game once again. The flying enemies that are in this area, they can also give you hover, so that's one little way of, at least of obtaining some extra hover when you need it, the little flying spheres and such. Now you can manage to get up this wall with only 3, but it takes a little bit of effort. You gotta do it absolutely perfectly. If you get hit by this guy who's going to be on this cliff here, you're going to end up falling down. but if you move right where I was or so, you're able to bypass those guys and get up the cliff enough in order to make it to the first platform. While traveling upwards, though, you can see they give you multiple other hovers in order to build it up quick, the ones that give you 4 instantly. However, it is a little bit challenging to get up it. Like I said, you can do it with 3. If you've done it enough times, you can definitely easily do it with 3. But 4 or 5 is definitely my recommended amount of hover in order to get up that wall at the beginning. Now, however, we have entered a brand new stage that we finally haven't been to yet, and that's stage number 4. This is a, like, water-filled cave. If you like water, the next couple areas, well, you'll enjoy them a lot, because we're going to be seeing a lot of water-based areas for the next few stages or so. Stage number 5 is actually predominantly water. Now, in stage number 4, you easily can already tell that not much changes in terms of the enemies and the stuff that you have to deal with while traveling through the levels. The background and the platforms that we have to land on are